it's been really exciting to visit here. It's been 4 years since I last came, and that's a very long time. But I'm equally inspired. I've had very inspiring discussions. I was telling John in the last meeting, and I kept changing my talk, which I don't think was the optimal thing to do, because I realized, oh, this is exciting and this is a good way to present the material. But now I feel like I should have made one more change, because the last few slides I'm covering a new topic which is related to biomedical engineering that I wish I spent more time on. But that's the way it goes, I suppose. So this talk really, so I work very actively, and I've worked for quite many years in the area of energy efficient communications and thinking about what are the fundamental limits on energy requirements in communications when you take into account not just energy in transmission but the energy in digital circuitry at the transmitter and receiver. And that led me to think about problems in computing, because a lot of fundamental limits on computing that people had thought about were thinking through the lens of information theory, and more specifically through the lens of Shannon capacity, which I think is a limited lens to think about even for an overall energy minimization problem in communications, but especially in computing. So you can't ignore energy at the transmitter and receiver. So that was a perspective with which I started out, and I started looking at the literature. But then I realized that it's a very rich field with a long history, with a sequence of negative results, and progress has been slow to come by. And so has been the case with our research as well. But I hope to be able to convince you that there is reasonable progress to be made here. But it's a very exciting area with a lot of applications today. And that's going to be my first 2/3 to 3/4 of the talk. And then in the last quarter, it's a related idea of suppressing noise, but in this case in the context of sensing. I've been specifically, I started from the problem of neural sensing, and that led me down a path which has become exciting in its own right, and so I'll talk about that as well. If I have to summarize all the ideas in the first part of the talk, I think a good takeaway message is that the main difficulty with computing in presence of noise is that errors add up. So as you go around a computational path, errors will increase. And the question is, how can you suppress that increase in errors? How can you control it in order to compute efficiently? And so that's the focus of the research. Sorry, one more thing about the last slide. I decided to put the statement here because, does anybody know where this, who said the statement? I'm looking at Shenru specifically because she sent me a video last week which I got. Yeah. So it's not a very special statement, it's a special person who made the statement. But I think it connects both parts of the talk very nicely. And in particular, human brain is thought to have very noisy hardware. I certainly believe it has noisy hardware, but there is controversy on the matter.
Did he answer the question?
He was hopeful that in 15 years, according to the video that IT Society released last week, he was hopeful that in 10 to 15 years they will have computers that can do this. His master's thesis was on the problem of computing. His PhD thesis, actually not PhD thesis as much as his work at Bell Labs was on the communication problem. So you can view the noisy computing problem as a combination of the two. But he didn't.
Provided you know what you mean by what you do.
Yes, and I think that actually is a big issue that shows up because the answer depends so much on what you're trying to compute. So I'll get to that in a few slides. Okay, so the motivation of the talk, I'll spend just one slide on it, which is really about the way the computational systems are increasingly looking today and in the near future, is that noise is going to be inevitable. It is there today too, but it can be ignored in many situations. It has classically been ignored or dealt with through very crude techniques, such as repetition. If people know about TMR, triple modular redundancy strategy, that is used very frequently in hardware. And so the question becomes, can we bring an information theoretic view to it, and can we say, just as error correcting codes revolutionized communications, can we do the same thing for computing? And it's a question that really von Neumann asked in 1956, inspired by Shannon's work, and I'll give some answers that yes, this is the case. Error correcting codes can be helpful. in reducing energy consumption in order sense. But I can only say this statement for a very limited set of computations. So I'll talk about that. And then the second part I've already talked about this. We're going to talk about a very noisy piece of hardware, the human brain. I've taken the position that I want to look at the limits on sensing rather than actual computation that's going on, and so I'm going to talk about that. Okay. So why consider noisy computational elements? We all hear about Moore's law saturating. Moore's law is actually not saturating that quickly as much as Dennard scaling, a lesser known sibling of Moore's law, is saturating, which is to do with energy consumption in computational systems. And really what's going on is as you reduce the size of devices, the energy consumption is not scaling just as it used to. And that's to do with leakage effects, but also voltage can be reduced, and so because unreliability comes in. And components inherently become unreliable. They are modeled in various ways. It has spatial dependence, it has IIDness. It really depends on what substrate you're using to build the system. But the fact remains that newer and newer devices that are smaller and more energy efficient are noisy. And whether it's CMOS or alternatives to CMOS, all of them seem to have noise in them. We haven't come up with, otherwise we would have another revolution. But we haven't figured out a way yet to be able to build small energy efficient devices without having them be noisy. One of the more radical approaches is a return to, I suppose, it's not that radical, but I think the strength with which it is being pushed right now is radical, is a return to analog computing. And the way they are thinking about it is, one of the ways they are thinking about it is that instead of thinking of computation in bits or operations, let's think about them as larger units of computation. And so this is an example of a dot product computation. By trying to think about, and I'm sort of foreshadowing how I'm going to think about it, trying to think about larger set of computations with smaller building blocks to it, and saying if we can compute them reliably, then what can we do? Or the amount of unreliability in computing a dot product, for instance, how do we leverage that to build a computational system that is otherwise reliable to the degree that we want it to? And of course, we know that nature operates with, or we believe that nature operates with inherently noisy hardware, so that's another reason to understand the problem. Getting more technical, what's the difficulty with this problem of noisy computing? And I think it genuinely goes a lot beyond classical information theory, and that's what this slide is about. So let's think about a simple noisy gate, D input, or less than equal to D inputs, with a single binary output and binary inputs. Just to exemplify the difficulties here, with a flip probability of epsilon. So it's a binary symmetric channel at the output, if you like. That's the model for this gate. It's a crude model, simple model. And now you can start building circuits. So you can have a concatenation of links, which is a boring circuit, and then you start building architectures out of it. You start connecting these components, and this is a very simple way of looking at circuits. And one of the difficulties shows up even here. If you start using classical information theoretic tools on this problem, you'll quickly observe that they are very limited, at least the first course in information theory tools. So just to give an example, let's think of these gates as all noisy in this setup or in this setup. And if you use your traditional cut set bound or data processing inequality, the difficulty is that it doesn't capture the fact that information is lost across the links, which is what I meant when I said the errors add up. And so you need different tools, and this is the conventional data processing inequality in a 3-node case, which is acquiring a lot of attention these days. So the mutual information between x and z is less than the mutual information between x and y. That's what data processing inequality tells you, even for x, y, and z scalars. But
Okay.
yes.
So we know what the transmission problem is, the communication problem. It's
Yes.
well formulated.
Yes.
What is the noisy computing problem? What exactly does it say?
Yeah. This is.
What is the formulation?
So I'm going to focus on. So it's going to change wildly from one function to the other. But the main question is, how do you, so you have a network of computational elements which perform simple computations. I'm going to take examples with XOR, a majority and things like that, AND gates and so on. How do you connect them in order to compute the function with the desired reliability?
Are you given inputs to the function?
Yes.
And is it all clearly specified?
So you are given the function to be computed. I'm going to take a linear transform. So I know the inputs, I know the outputs, I know the transformation to be done, and I'm going to tell you that every binary operation that you do is going to have an error with some probability. How do you connect these components to be able to attain a desired reliability? Thank you. Because I don't have a slide on that. So I mean, I should have, but it shows up, but it's sort of dispersed. So thanks for helping me clarify that. So data processing inequality doesn't capture that, but if you look at the more recent Evans and Shulman in their 1999 paper called Quantified Data Processing Inequality and what is now called Strong Data Processing Inequality, it is able to capture the loss in information as you go down a path in the circuit. And so they strictly show that if there is a binary symmetric channel between X, Y, and Z, then this ratio of mutual information is bounded below 1. So there is a loss in information in going from here to here, and then you can concatenate this, so you get f epsilon squared if you go another link down and so on. So the information is lost along any particular path in the circuit. And that's one tool to capture this.
Well, why is it that strictly the equality less related to f epsilon captures the loss of information?
So by captures I mean that the mutual information end to end, we expect it to go to 0 as the number of links increases, but the classical cut-set bound or DPI, data processing inequality, don't show that.
Well, we're not allowing you to conclude that.
Yes. We have an extension of these results in the context of lossy distributed compression where multiple nodes are compressing, which ends up requiring similar sets of tools, at least to a degree. We are also able to say, and I'll come back to this result after my achievability, that if you have a set of noisy nodes and a certain relationship between energy of a node and error probability, then if you hook them up together, you can provide fundamental limits on energy that show that energy per bit, per output bit of function computation for linear transforms again must diverge to infinity. So I will get to that as well. But a complication in this area generally is that good strategies and fundamental limits will vary wildly from one function to the other. And so we have to start with something that is simple but acts as a building block for other problems, for larger problems as well. So, yes.
Maybe I need another coffee, but isn't that
Should I go ahead?
data processing inequality period? Because if it was not true,
Yeah.
then using long enough blocks and
Yeah.
using IDX, the sequence of X,
Yeah.
you would breach the capacity of the channel, which is less than.
No, this is loss in mutual information. So this one quantity, each of these quantities is bounded by the capacity of the channel, but the ratio of them is not 1. So think of a sequence of relay links, and each of them has capacity equal to C. So they're all equal capacity. Then you ask the question, what is the end-to-end capacity of the system? It's actually C, right? Cut-set bounded. Actually, your counter example comes to mind, the Gaussian counter example,
Yeah.
which is connected to all of this, but that only works because it's a scalar problem. So if you take the infinite length results as they are stated, right, and you ask me the question, what is the capacity, you will say it's C. But if you ask what is the end-to-end mutual information as block length goes to infinity for a finite number of links, again it's C or n times C. But if you fix the block length and let the number of links go to infinity, then the mutual information decays to 0.
Yeah.
So that is the aspect that this is able to capture. So this is a fundamentally scalar result that can be extended, and I think Max Rogensky has an extension that extends to vectors as well. Does that help?
But what we did can also be what we did is also extendable to vectors, that complex number.
But as n goes to infinity, that counterexample won't hold. Or, I mean, let me not go that far because I'm trying to remember the counterexample at the same time.
Numbers
Extend
is
the dimension of the vectors.
Yes, yes. So xn, yn, zn, yes.
Okay.
And so this is a fundamentally scalar result that Evans and Schumann derived that won't hold if you let Doppler go to infinity.
Yeah.
It will be actually equal to 1.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah. So I'm not going to delve too much into the history of this field. There's a lot of recent work on noisy decoring. Haji-Costas had some very nice ideas on noise-tolerant linear dynamical systems, and there's the classical literature of Von Neumann and Pippinger, which is actually very deep and beautiful pieces of works as well. But by and large, these works assume that there are some noiseless gates available. And to me, that loses the essence of the problem because you can start, the first pieces of works implicitly assume that, and then these pieces of work somewhat more explicitly. Because if you can start accumulating information at the end with noiseless gates, it relieves the problem of its main difficulty, which is that the information is being lost. Noise here, again, I'm thinking of gates. Yeah, implicitly so far, I'll make the model explicit, but implicitly right now I'm assuming that all the gates are IID noisy, in that they might fail to compute what they are going to compute. These are binary gates in all of these works.
And this noise is empirically validated.
So, good question. There are models in which it is a good approximation, and there are problems or substrates or devices in which it's a good approximation and devices in which it's a bad approximation. A problem where it's a good approximation is spintronics, which is computation using electronic sprints up and down, so it's binary computations. And for those, it's recently, actually in 2012 they did a lot of calculations on that, but it was known for quite a while that there is a more IID nature to those errors. But by and large, for most devices and substrates, the errors are correlated across space and can be stuck at errors. So I want to address those problems as well. And I'll come to that issue.
That question,
Yeah.
the results is very fundamental.
Yeah.
Nobody has convinced me that the noise they use validates by empirical evidence. It's certain. In mathematics, there is a group that started believing that probability models we use, you see my algebras and probabilities that they are too rich for the actual program, and that makes probability better. We'll talk about it.
Okay.
Just taking anything you want and adding Gaussian noise or whatever noise.
Yes.
Very valuable.
I'll try to convince you that these assumptions get you far enough, and a modification on these techniques, which is, I'm getting too far ahead of myself, but there are techniques that let you cross models, error correction techniques, so I'll get to that. But what I wanted to deal with when I started out was that all gates should be error prone. And so if you have some encoding going on, some decoding going on, it's not necessary that the structure is built in this fashion. But we are hoping that we'll introduce redundancy into the computational system. And if you have encoding and decoding or some computing and some computing, they all have to be error prone. You can't have assumptions that some gates are noise free. That's something I wanted to stick to. And then the question was, what should we start with? Then we started thinking, okay, what are the building blocks of communication and computing systems? And the first thing we looked at, which is what we have had some reasonable success with, is noisy linear transformations. So that's what I'm going to focus for most of my talk on. And then I'll talk briefly about some nonlinear computations that we can do as well. And even before we got all the way here, we started thinking about what could be the simplest problem that we can look here. And we looked at the problem of noisy encoding. So I'll first talk about that. Then I'll lead to talking about how that can help us address noisy linear transforms. And then I'll go from there. And I'm hoping that you can suggest me some elementary functions. So I've been thinking about these things for a while. And I have some thoughts. Iterative Hart threshold thing is one of those. That I've been, what are elementary functions that show up in computations that people are interested in today or are fundamentally important computations? That's something I would love to learn more about. and then think about how we can enable them with that direction. We generally wanted to connect our work with energy efficiency, and so we are able to show that if you do the counterpart uncoded algorithm versus a coded-based algorithm which uses the correct encodes, then you can improve the energy consumption, reduce the energy consumption in some order sense. That's something we wanted to accomplish, and so I'll talk about that as well. Okay, so that's my setup. Let me just take out my watch so that I have an eye on the time. So the first problem I want to talk about is noisy encoding. And one way to motivate this problem, which is not the best way to motivate it, is that we already understand there's a lot of literature starting from 1967 on the problem of noisy decoding. So, and by and large, the literature has focused on sparse graph-based LDPC type codes. So they say if passing of messages is an error, then what is the reliability with which you can decode the signal? And there has been actually a slew of papers recently, 2014, 2015 on the matter as well. And we understand from channel theory how to deal with a noisy channel, but we don't know how to understand how to build a noisy code. So that's sort of a boring motivation to start with, except it's actually important in some applications such as in outer space, radiation bombards chips. So if you want to think about encoding in that situation, I've been told that encoding can be noisy, and radiation-based noise, how to deal with that is a genuine issue there. And so that's something I haven't delved into with enough detail, but that's one motivation for the problem. But what turns out to be the case is also, foreshadowing where I'm going, for computing in presence of noise like linear computation, noisy encoding gets us pretty far. And in some sense, I mean, quote unquote halfway, there is no quantification there. And so this is going to be my model. I'll have three kinds of gates: AND gates, XOR gates, majority gate, and I want to compute encoding of an LDPC code with gates that are noisy and flip with some probability. And the noise is assumed to be IID for now, and that's something I'll change as well. And the IID motivation came from Spintronics, and there is recent work. These are circuits people at UIUC, circuits and devices people. This is a physicist, and they have looked at the error probabilities of Spintronics, and these are theoretical conclusions. I don't think there's an experimental validation of this, but the conclusion is that these are IID with a flip probability of a gate being proportional to e to the power minus gamma square root of the energy of the gate. And this is some simplifications that I did on their eventual results to get a simplified expression for this. Okay, so how do we do this? And a simple but an important observation: to get reliable encoding is that we are talking about encoding. So what we are doing, the operation we are performing has some inherent resilience to noise, and the question is, can we leverage that to reduce to improve the reliability of the computation too? And it comes with a cost that I'll talk about as well. So in the coding theory way of writing things, X is a row vector, which is the code word that I want to compute, which is obtained by multiplying S, a row vector, with G, the matrix K cross N matrix, which expands the binary vector Sk to a binary vector of length N. Classical coding problem. And a simple observation is, okay, this is barely an observation, but you can write this as S1 times the first row G1 plus S2 scalar times the second row G2 of the generator matrix, and so on. And another simple observation here is that any partial sum of these is a code word, right? And so the hope is, and it turns out, so the any partial sum computed here is a code word. If computed incorrectly, can we correct errors by embedding decoders inside the encoder? That was the, yes?
In this setting, why wouldn't you add a few parities to each row in the matrix and then you can correct errors?
So the, you mean in the generator matrix itself?
Yes.
you could change the code in order to compute correctly, and actually that's an approach that was adopted in parallel by a group of Elsa Dupraz and Valentin Savin at I think India and France, but somewhere in France.
South France.
Okay.
India and East.
I see. They have two codes going in parallel. You still have to remember that you can add a code, but you will have to decode and compute those parities with errors. So the computation of parities is error prone, and the decoding algorithm will also be prone to errors. So there is that issue there. It's not an approach that I have studied deeply. So it could be competing and could have order sense improved or less performance. I haven't looked into that.
So the assumption is that not only this multiplication, but also the error correction itself
Yes.
is error prone.
Yes.
Mm.
And the computation of parities too. And so we are leveraging a lot of work, especially from Lara Dolisac's group, on decoding in presence of noise. And so what happens is, classically your error probability goes to 0 if you're operating below the threshold. Here it saturates to a certain number, which is close to the last gate's error problem. That's it.
And the physical substrate for this computation assume these
Yeah.
microelectronics, microchips, what?
Let me think about that. So the work.
Because we started by
So they're thinking ASIC.
we started by a very nice slide, and then the physics went away.
Yeah. So the physics is.
Okay, the physics is basic. Or chips or what?
So I would say emerging devices, and if you want to make it concrete, spintronics. And just we
So
keep.
that's it for physics.
Yes. Dan.
And last comes some
Yes.
right?
Yeah. So if we take classical semiconductors and if we do voltage scaling, for instance, to introduce errors but reduce energy consumption, then by and large what you're going to observe is that gates fail, some gates fail, and they just refuse to compute correctly after that. So there are more stuck at errors kind of situations, which are unpredictable because it depends on the channel lengths and things like that. So yeah. But to make it very concrete, I think let's think of binary operations which have IID errors, and spintronics is one example that does it. But as I said, I'll extend. I'll try to convince you that we can go beyond that too. Okay. So going back here, we can compute partial sums, and we can correct errors. We can think about correcting errors with a noisy decoder after computing these partial sums. And so we can think of using a sequential algorithm. Compute these two things, add it to the third element, you have first 3 correct errors, add another element, correct errors, and so on. Because any partial sum is a valid code word of this code. Okay. Okay. And so that's this algorithm, or this architecture if you like. So bits are coming in, and there's a compute and correct unit which stores the generator matrix or appropriate rows of generator matrix. So this first unit, for instance, will compute S1 G1 plus S2 G2. What does this mean? These are XOR operations between S1 and G1, S1 being one bit and G1 being a vector. You take these XOR operations, AND operations. So you take these AND operations, you take these AND operations, and you do an XOR operation at the end. And all of these operations are noisy. Okay. And then the resulting thing, if computed correctly, would be a valid code word, but we can run a noisy decoder on it. If there are errors, you can reduce the errors to a certain probability of error. But of course, it won't go to 0 because there is a noisy decoding algorithm at the end. So that's one way to think about this. The difficulty that arises, especially, so we are thinking in the context of LDPC codes, LDPC decoders, is that the number of steps in the algorithm here is order n or order k, and k is proportional to n. And the girth of the code is order log n. So what's going to happen is that if you execute one decoding iteration at each of these steps, and you start looking at the tree from the very end, you'll notice that there is a correlation that gets induced in the messages that are being passed. So you can't run a density evolution algorithm and you can't analyze the performance. And in fact, we know that, of course, we can go beyond the girth and improve error probability still, but you don't expect that it will keep improving until order n steps. Right? So you start hitting that issue, but a simple hack gets us around that, which is that we arrange these nodes in a tree. So we have bits that are fed from down here. They go into a compute and correct unit, which computes a finite number of sums, so S1G1 plus S2G2 plus S3G3 and so on. Each compute and correct unit will have more than 2 inputs, and I'll come to why. But D inputs that come in, so D code words are formed. You have a compute and correct unit, a correction unit at the end, which is the error correction that happens. So this helps me explain it better. So D inputs come in, they get XORed. You have a decoding, noisy decoder at the end, and then you get the output and you send it to the next stage. The hope is that because now you have log n order girth and log n order steps, you will not hit the code girth, and you can use density evolution to analyze the performance of the algorithm. And this is this is the mathematical result that I'll talk about in the next slide, which is that what happens here is that when you do the computation, your error probability increases because you have these AND operations and XOR operations happening. So each output has a high error probability, but then you run a noisy decoder and the error probability goes down to something that is close to what the noisy decoder can bring it down to. And then it goes up again when you compute, and then it goes down again when you correct, and so on. Yes?
Sorry, I'm lost in the details,
Yeah.
but at a high level, why can I not formulate the following problem?
Yes.
The decoder is getting these inputs, which are the outputs of the channel, right? It has to perform certain operations, and these operations can be in error.
Yes.
So,
That's the noisy decoding problem.
yeah,
Yes, but this is, okay, go ahead.
in any of these problems,
Yes.
any computational problem,
Yes.
why can I think of it as sending the inputs, which have to be computed in functional form, through a channel? The channel and the output of the channel doesn't have to recover all the inputs, but a function of the inputs. Okay. And there is some noise in the channel. This is the kind of work that Michael Gaspard and Bob Aknazer and
Yeah.
others have been doing.
So
Does that not capture what you're trying to do at a high level?
no, and the reason is this, that the number of, so let's think of it like this, that you went with a straightforward matrix multiplication here. Let me see if this helps answer your question, otherwise I'll come back. So you have this matrix multiplication to do. The number of computations you do before you input it into the decoder affects the performance of the decoder.
Yes.
In particular, as k goes to infinity, in this case, a row multiplication, a dot product here, a row and column multiplication here, the error probability is going to go to half. So if you feed it into the decoder at the end of the computation, you won't get anything reliable out of it. So the point of these compute and correct units is to make sure that during the, so you have to combine the computing with the error correction. If you do them in isolation, then the error propagation already has happened and you can't correct it anymore. You're beyond the threshold, you're sort of beyond the capabilities of the decoder. But if you embed these decoders and have repeated error suppression in the problem, and which is thinking about computing and computation, error correction and computing in a combined, coding and computing in a combined fashion, that helps you do that. Is that convincing?
Yeah, that's fine. This is my lack of understanding.
So the question is, if I take in
Yeah.
so what, the two questions. What is the effect of the efficiency of the algorithm using the computation on the problem we're talking about? Because I can reduce the arithmetic operations. And I'm thinking that eventually, given your first slide, that I have to think about computation and energy. And energy to me means that you go down to physics and see where the computation actually performs. So the number of operations you make, which is affected by the algorithm you're using, is going to have to play a role.
Yes.
And B, the kind of physics you use. So, in other words, where are you going to do this calculation? That's what I'm waiting for. So
Yes.
basically, there is a play between The operation you do, abstraction, I have to do AX, right?
Yes.
How you do it physically, and how you implement in physics, and then what is the end? You try to understand what is the interplay between whatever kind of error correction, linear algebra, or anything, right? So I'm waiting for that to see the data. Because that's what we said in the beginning, right? You want to do information, energy, data.
Yes.
So this is not a question, it's just an expectation.
Yes. Yes. I'll get to that. I'm just thinking I may not have a curve to show you, but I'll make an argument of how that calculation goes. Okay. And so what we are able to show, this is the algebra is complicated, but the result, the intuition is not very hard. What we are able to show is that what we want to show is once inputs with some flip probability go into a compute and correct unit, the output that falls out of it has the same error probability as the input, which is epsilon. Let's say each of these inputs had some flip probability epsilon, then the correction unit at best can get an output error probability epsilon 2. What we are able to show with this is that for the particular computation that we are interested in, that there is some quantity Pm times 1 plus delta, as long as the input error probability is bounded by that, the output error probability is also bounded by that. And so I think the...
So if I can translate, all you've shown so far is that by injecting this error and compute unit,
Yes.
you are maintaining
Yes.
the error across a reasonably large cascade of the same unit.
Yes.
You're not letting it grow at all.
The cascade.
No, the error probability.
Yes.
You're controlling it down.
Yes.
That's what you
Yes.
shown so far.
Yes.
Is that a
Yes.
colloquial sort of expression?
Yes. Yeah, that's the right way to view it, actually. I should mention that at this point. So, and that is the point, that with embedding these decoders, you can actually keep correcting errors. And this is something that was observed at a converse level in the work of Evans and Shulman, where they said, if you have a general, so they were talking about a computational path and how the information decays along that computational path. But if you start having a general computation where you have multiple paths converging at the end at a single node or multiple nodes, then they give an upper bound on how much mutual information is there.
I'm not sure what you said.
That has something to say about the talk, but I'm not going was there a way of saying communicating a message? Okay, so in the Evans and Shulman paper, they combine information to get an outer bound on how much the error probability is, or the amount of information, mutual information is between the correct output and the output they compute. They accumulate information along different paths, and they use that to compute a bound. And this is sort of an achievability that in Spirit captures their converse technique. And I think to get that, you will, to get, so what's going on is you disperse the information in the computation, and then you accumulate information from multiple paths in order to keep reliability bounded, even as the information is decaying along any particular path in the computation, which is a fundamental aspect that is captured by the strong data processing inequalities. Okay, so what we are able to show here, which is getting to the energy point, but is not all the way there, is that if we just use repetition, whether it's embedded inside this computation to make all the operations reliable, or, so that's my algorithm that I'm going to get it against, or if I use repetition after the entire computation and repeating it multiple times. Either way, the computational complexity required by this algorithm is lower than the computational, for the same reliability, than the computational complexity required by this counterpart algorithm.
Where computation complexity means?
Number of operations.
Where operation means?
These AND gates and XOR gates are the three gates that I'm using. You're allowed to use a combination of these gates to compute your function. the majority gate, the XOR gates, and the AND gates.
So the energy pursued by the gates is going to be the.
Yeah.
You're the number.
The number right now. The energy mapping, I don't have a slide on it, but wait, it will show up after. So the result I'll talk about, I don't have a slide on it, but this is the way we make it work. So we say you have a certain reliability that you want to achieve, and there are two, and you have a trade-off between energy and reliability of a gate. Then the question is, how do you change this energy, and how you can increase and reduce the energy of gates as the computation proceeds, or you can keep it constant. In either case, with the relationship between error probability and energy being exponentially reducing or polynomially reducing error probability with energy of a gate, you're able to show that this strategy outperforms at least we didn't allow all possible strategies on the naive repetition based algorithm side, but if you use for fixed energy it definitely outperforms, and for energy that is increased in stages of the algorithm, but keeping it fixed across gates, we are able to show that this outperforms. So very simple, but it outperforms in order sense the energy requirements for using repetition.
Would be half
Yes.
the energy of the gate.
Yes.
How do you model it in the computation?
Yes. So there are two. So I talked about the spintronics things, which is error probability goes on exponentially, sub-exponentially, but e to the power minus gamma times square root of energy.
And where does it come from?
That's from spintronics. So that's you take the physics of the model, and there are papers about it that say this is what it boils down to, and then we simplify the expression to get that.
Okay.
And then for the sake of analysis, we said, okay, there could also be exponential decays, there could also be polynomial decays, so we consider all these three.
So it's hypothesized.
Yes.
This-
So in some devices it's better understood, such as in spintronics. In many devices this is still open to experiments and understanding.
There is no result which is along the lines of 1 plus signal to noise ratio that comes in the natural world, is it? In the
1 plus SNR,
Yeah, the signal to noise ratio that comes in when we do
Yes.
transmission problems.
yes.
There is no analog in a computational problem. I don't mean signal to noise ratio, but there is no natural formula that comes without foisting it on the model itself.
No, there are. So, I mean, and that's what, spintronics is one example. I can give you another example. So when there is a variability in the channel size and you reduce the size of the channel, this is the channel inside the transistor.
Yes.
Then the number of electrons at some point will become variable to the degree that laws of large numbers don't apply.
Okay.
And in that situation, you can get a model out of this that says that the predictability that allows you to write IV relationships in a transistor will not exist anymore. And so there is some probabilistic effects that will show up because of that. Okay. There are other ways of thinking about functions that are, so people are characterizing these things for like the analog dot products that they were computing. They again have reliability or MMSE versus energy trade-offs, and you can leverage those as well. Okay. If you can do so far what we talked about is if you want to compute if you want to compute encoding of a function, then this is one algorithm that allows you to do encoding with a reliable guarantee on end-to-end computation probability. Then we said, okay, let's see if we can extend these ideas to computing. And a trick that Haligrosses used, and I'm sure he wasn't the first person to use it, gets us across.
Extend to what?
To linear transforms. So what I want to compute is an output.
How is that different from the previous setting?
So there was a natural code that we could exploit, which was a generator matrix.
But it's exactly the same problem, isn't it?
Here A is not naturally, so kind of the point of the slide is that yeah, they are very similar problems, and if that's what you're getting at, then yes. But right now, A is not a matrix which has some natural error correction capabilities embedded in it. So we have to artificially introduce that. And the question is, how do we do that? Yeah. The question is, how do we do that? And the answer,
Well, you encode it.
yeah. But you have, I think that, that's the obvious answer, but the question is, how do you do that encoding? And so this is one way to do it, but it gets you there. So there's one subtle thing that I'll talk about, and maybe you are foreseeing that too. But I agree that this is the natural next step. There's nothing. There is prior work that helps us do that, which is Haji-Korstes' work. So what you do is you imagine that you want to compute this coded output x1 up to xn, which is an encoding on r1 up to rk. And how would this coded output be generated? Well, if you computed instead of s times a, you computed s times g tilde, where g tilde is a times g. So you code the computation. So you're changing the computation. Instead of computing s times a, you're computing s times g tilde. Where G is a systematic generator matrix of a good, again we are assuming an LDPC type code because we want to use noisy error correction techniques. Then the question is, can you get reliability out of this? Is this, Sasha, is this consistent with what you were expecting?
Yes.
And so the observation again is that rows of G tilde, which is this combined matrix, are also code words of G. Right? And so you can use, yeah, so exactly. And so you can, this is the observation that Haji-Korstes used in his paper in 2005, but had been used earlier as well. So you can think of this as an encoded computation, so you multiply s with G tilde, and you assume that this has been computed noiselessly. So this is something that offline you compute noiselessly and you build a circuit around it to be able to compute s times G tilde, where these multiplications are going to happen, and these AND operations and XOR operations are going to happen in a noisy fashion. And so then the rest of the technology just works out as is. So we use again, we use the parity-check matrix H for G, which we assume is sparse, and we use it repeatedly to suppress errors. The novelty again beyond Haji-Korstes' work is that we have repeated error suppression, which is really coming from a noisy encoding strategy. And again, all computations are noisy, which is not true in his work because he assumes that encoding is noiseless.
So the claim is that this is optimal or what?
No.
Because there are many other ways I can do that. I don't have
Yes.
to code it. If I'm doing
Yes.
R equals SA
Yes.
with very little error,
Yes.
I can go on for about 10 minutes
Yes.
about methods.
The only thing I can show is that this outperforms repetition and uncoded in order sense. And it seems straightforward, but what I can say is that there has been a lot of buzz.
I'm not addressing whether it's straightforward or something. If your objective is to do a computation
Yes.
of a vector times a metric
Yes.
in a way that is energy efficient
Yes.
and with control error, there are many ways to do that. This is not the only one.
Yes.
So
But-
what is the claim?
That it beats the counterpart. If you do a naive repetition strategy, it beats it in order sense for the same reliability. And this, I want to emphasize on this because this area has been on for a long time, noisy computing, but there are no results that actually show this, that you beat uncoded or repetition or uncoded in order sense. And so that's, this is the formal statement of the result, but the error probability per bit is, so it increases in the computation, reduces in the correction unit. This is a simulation with a 500 times LDPC code. And it stays between the error probability of the majority gate and some constant value above that. So you can keep it bounded. And repetition-based approaches, we are able to show using a lower bound technique that it requires at least an order log L factor extra, where L is the size of the matrix, the number of column rows in the matrix.
Is the P majority general low bound or is it a low bound for this scheme?
It's a lower bound for the scheme, but it's also a general lower bound because majority is the last gate. I mean, there is a last gate effect, so you can't beat that. Yeah. And so here's where the energy models come in. So we said for exponential and for polynomial decays of error probability with gate energy, you can show that the energy here is less than the encoded energy or repetition energy in order sense. And this is something we're going to talk about at ISIT this year. And I think the nice thing is that, so we can ask, is coding useful in the context of communications? Obviously, we have seen that gains are infinite, and that's the quantification. Coding gain tells us that. Whether coding is useful in computation, there is not that much evidence around it. And in fact, I don't know if there is evidence that sophisticated codes can actually beat repetition or uncoded strategies in order sense. And this is one piece of evidence that shows that this is possible for limited models. Okay. I think so. I'm running out of time. So what I'll do is, so this was the main point of the first part of the talk. The next 2 slides are about the converse results, which are related to what I talked about in the beginning. That if you start looking at limits on energy consumption, this is with slightly different models where I take, not actually slightly, but very different models where I take energy of wiring into account as well, the information friction model that I was talking about yesterday. Then I'm able to show that energy per output bit must go to infinity as the error probability goes to 0. And this is intuitive, is it believable that energy per output bit must, it should go to infinity, but it doesn't happen in classical Shannon theory. And so, because energy per bit, you give a number there, minus 1.59 dB or, so energy per bit remains bounded in communication problems even as the error probability goes to 0. Here it must diverge to infinity. This is a lower bound in some model of implementation where some of the gates are noisy and they have some exponential relationship with error probability, and it can be generalized and extended. But that's one thing that I wanted to communicate, and it's inspired from these communication type problems. And now that we have these results, we are able to extend them to real numbers. So I talked about binary computation so far. I'm being too quick? No, okay. I talked about binary computation problems so far, but they can be extended to real number computations under assumptions that you are implementing these filters, which are real number filters. So that's my basic unit of computation now, which is again inspired from the analog dot products that people are building these days. And you can leverage some techniques on error correction, which are really coming from compressor sensing literature. This is a nice paper that I'm sure a lot of you have read, Decoding by Linear Programming, which connects the error correcting problem with the compressor sensing problem with sparse errors. So if you have filter failures of these analog components, how would you correct them? And again, a similar technology to what we developed here applies here as well. And now we are extending these results. Let me choose what I want to mention here. I think this is a connection that I'm quite excited about, which is people are noticing that, so I've been talking about small circuits and devices, but in larger data center networks, people have been, a recent work of Kamukli, Pedarsani and Ramachandran from Berkeley talks about delays in computations and treating them as erasures. And so there are some connections of what we have done here with that as well, that I'm exploring with Vivek Kadambe, who had some very nice ideas on how we can do linear transforms through leveraging techniques that we have in a distributed computing setting, and thinking of again delays as errors. Yeah. So I'm going to move to a slightly different topic. Actually, how much time can I take? Because it's already, I'm out of time. 5 minutes. Okay. So I'm going to move to a slightly different topic, which is the neural sensing problem. And really, what we got inspired by is looking at these tree architectures, which in encoded the strategy that we use in computation, which reduces the amount of error propagation that happens. And we were talking to people who were building EEG systems, and we realized that it's applicable there as well. So we did theory for that and experiments for that, and that led to a lot of follow-on work that took its own direction. So I briefly want to talk about that, and then I'm done. So the problem here, and I want to talk about this also because I'm hoping for I'm hoping to understand if there is existing working information theory that already addresses this problem. That's the other goal for us. So what's going on in these systems is that these are multiple small sensors that we want to build high density EEG sensing systems. And what happens is that there is a lot of spatial correlation, which is quantifiable, at least for spherical head models, between neighboring sensors on this neural measurement system. So if you take two sensors that are nearby, you can quantify how much the correlation is going to be. And this is with some assumptions of white signal on the brain surface. And then we did experiments to see that actually, yeah, it gets pretty high, and the curves look similar. Of course, they are not going to match in numbers, but the point being that as you bring sensors closer and closer, the resolution, the correlation becomes very high. We also noticed that even though the correlation is high, the information that is hiding in lower order bits is very important, because that is what captures the high resolution information inside the brain. So if you want to image the brain, you want to be able to leverage those lower order bits, the information captured inside of them, to understand what are the high spatial frequency, where is the high spatial frequency information hiding. So to get high resolution reconstructions. And a simple model for this, this is not a precise model because this is not a stable Hawk, but you can have, you can say there is a Markov source that is being sensed. So it models the spatial correlation. And we said, let's start with the Gauss-Markov process. It also brings out the gains of the strategy rather more optimistically. But the question is, you want to compress this Markov source, where x1 up to xn are observed on different sensors. Actually, there's a slight twist that I'll talk about as well. But these are, but at one level you can think of them as spatial sensors that are sensing correlated signals. And you want to compress them at the source so that you don't have to use high resolution ADCs to sense that. How do you do that?
Do we have a Markov filter or not?
Yes.
And what do you mean by source?
Source is this x1, f2, xn, the elements that are being observed, which have this Markov behavior. So I'm thinking that each of these sensors spatially have some correlation, and I'm modeling them in this fashion. And another interestingness of this problem is that because you're measuring potentials, you can measure differences, because voltages are always differences between any two points. So the current strategy that is used is you have a global reference, which is on the ear or shoulder, and then you measure all of these potentials with respect to this global reference, and then you amplify it and apply ADC to it. ADC is where information really comes in, bits come in. And the question is, can we exploit correlations to do better? One strategy can be sequential differences. And this is Kim and Berger. They examined this strategy in 2005-2006 for compressing Markov sources. And if you do that and you pass it into an ADC, you run into an obvious problem, which they also observed, which is that errors add up. And so you have to have high resolution for initial ADCs and so on. You can't use DPCM, which is an optimal strategy, because this is not a centralized system. And DPCM, which is, I forget the full form, differential phase coherent modulation.
Pulse
coherent modulation. Thank you.
Pulse coherent.
Yeah, differential pulse coherent modulation. It requires the transmitter to know the reconstruction of the receiver. But because this is a distributed system, you don't know that. And so you can't apply that technique either. But what works out better than, again, I don't have an optimality result here, what works out better than both of these techniques, and it works out only because we are doing spatial sensing, not temporal sensing, is that we can build a hierarchical tree. So we can first sense a middle sensor with respect to a global sensor, and then go down another level and sense things that are farther away, red ones with respect to the black one, and blue ones with respect to the red one, and then these small black ones with respect to the blue one. What I'm getting at is that earlier the errors added up linearly with the number of sensors, now they are only going to add up logarithmically. In fact, we can go a step further and we can dedicate more bits to these sensors that are at a higher level in the tree, more bits of ADCs. So we used ADC models to argue that there are gains in energy. But if you just count number of bits, which is a crude model and really doesn't capture energy, then the hierarchical energy beats, there is a log n in the other two strategies that are the straightforward strategies. The hierarchical strategy beats the other two strategies in order sense, in a log n sense.
Yeah, you're doing the processing in a completely distributed way, right?
The acquisition, yes.
And the compression?
The compression too. But the reconstruction is done centralized.
Sure.
Yes.
But the compression, instead of doing completely distributed, in a completely distributed form,
Yeah.
you could cluster them, like there's no harm in that. How could you do much better that way? You could have multiple clusters which compress, so it's not completely distributed, but somewhere in between.
So I wouldn't know how to do that because we are doing, compression is done through ADCs. So it's just bit allocation. And so you don't have a step where you first acquire the signal and then do compression. And so we don't have experiment results, but what we did is, this is data recorded from existing equipment, this is our simulations, and then we projected based on the existing equipment how much the bit savings would be with our theoretical strategy. And with 3 mm separation in electrodes, we saved 3 bits of ADC and energy in the order of 5x, I think. I don't remember the exact number. But you can save a lot of energy for high density EEG. And then we got into this question of, do we need high density EEG? And that led us down another path, which made us question a lot of assumptions in the field. I don't think I have time to go into it because I'm already over time. But if there's interest, I would love to talk about that. So to summarize, the point of the talk is that there is error accumulation in computation and sensing systems, computational sensing systems anyway. But there are ways to deal with those error accumulation. The negative results that you have, which are on information dissipation in networks, don't mean that you can't accumulate information from multiple paths, even when all components are noisy, to be able to keep error probability suppressed, which is an inference that you can, or is a trap that you can easily fall into. Even though I agree that models are somewhat unrealistic, and we have results that make some of these models more realistic. You can use expander codes, expander LDPCs instead of the LDPCs that we used here in order to deal with worst case errors instead of IID errors and things like that. But yeah, that's the main point of the talk. And if I have a couple of minutes, I want to talk about one more slide, but if I don't, that's fine, I can end it. Okay, so this is the fallout of the neural sensing strategy, because we were forced to, I was generally interested in the problem too, so I'm making it seem like I was more forced than I was. So what we needed to do was to capture the brain to scalp transfer function. So if you have a spatial distribution of the signal inside the brain, how does it propagate across the brain to scalp distance? And is recorded on the surface. This relates to our discussion yesterday. And the answer, which is very well known, is that there is a spatial low-pass filtering effect of the distance, and especially of the impedance mismatch between the skull and the other layers, scalp and CSF. But at the end of the day, it's a low-pass filtering effect. And because of that, people realized, and it was to a degree true, that you lose information as it passes through the system, this low-pass filtering system. But what they had not done is, and actually the result I want to talk about is this first. So this is work of Srinivasan et al. In '98 and shows up in a very nice book by Srinivasan and Lumiere, which describes neural sensing generally focusing on EEG. So we looked at that book, we looked at the papers, and we realized they had some mathematical errors in computing this transfer function. But also they were using this computational transfer function to give fundamental limits on how many sensors you need, using a spatial Nyquist rate analysis. But we realized Nyquist rate is not the fundamental limit here, because you need to start thinking about when does the noise hit the signal power. And so we analyzed that, and this is advertisement for work that we are going to present in ISIT, using very simple head models, which are the same models that Srinivasan and all use. We are able to show that by capturing the characteristics of this brain to scalp channel, you can get fundamental limits on the accuracy of source that you would image inside the brain. So you're not interested in recovering the EEG signal with some MMSE, you instead want to recover a dipole source that is sitting inside the brain with some MMSE error in its location. So how do you do that? That's what I'm going to talk about at ISIT. Prior work was using Kramer-Rao bounds on this problem, which are not good enough because most of the estimators, which are source localization algorithms for this problem, are bias estimators. And Kramer-Rao only applies to unbiased ones. Also, they are less intuitive, at least to me. So I like that we have some information for data just doing that. And then we have results on how many bits you require per sensor to get an accuracy that you want to achieve. an unrelated but interesting or directionally related result, but that doesn't leverage this brain to scale transfer function, is about inferring information flow directions from neural recordings, where you might have seen use of Granger causality, but we're able to construct very simple counterexamples that really use Sharpe-Kellogg strategy and show that even if you're measuring all nodes in the system and you use Granger causality to infer information flows, you can get the wrong answer.
That's why people can use this for direct information.
Directed information is just, so the same counter example applies to directed information as
It's
well.
not if you use direct information and one additional single measurement, then you can nail it.
I want to know more.
Yeah, on Parkinson disease, epilepsy, all that stuff. That's
So influence, yes. Information
You
flows.
can nail it. I can find the source, it's not my work. You can find the source. It's not just direct information. Direct information plus information.
Okay, so
The other question I have is,
Yeah.
why don't I think about this problem as an electrical impedance model problem?
okay,
And there's,
I don't know enough about EIT.
but that's what it is.
Okay.
There are markup algorithms for that, but there is finite accuracy that can go inside.
Yes,
It's linked to calculation.
yes,
So there are things that we understand in the
Yes.
program. If you think of them in this way.
yes,
There is none to code numerically. Let's say
yes,
a numerical analysis problem for this physiology.
yeah. Yeah, this has nothing to do with coding either.
Can you compare with that?
No, because I'm not aware of that literature. I just focused on, I mean, this is over the last 1.5 years, but I just focused on EEG. Yeah. Okay, thank you.